Good morning, everybody. Great to see you here. The aspiring GCs or the GCs, as the case may be. Well, I'd just like to start, by introducing everyone. On my immediate left, we have Andy Davidson, who is the Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary, L3 Technologies. Then we have Rich Rothberg, who's the Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Dell. We have Edward Ryan sitting in the corner, advisor to the CEO and former Executive Vice President and Global General Counsel, Marriott International Incorporated. And then we have Trish Walls, who's the Chief Legal Officer at Voya Financial Incorporated. Welcome, everyone, and welcome, panelists. And my name is Tushar Chawla, and the legal head of JLL India. I also handle ethics and compliance for JLL India. So I was, we were talking in the morning today, and collectively, if you exclude me, all the 3 people or 4 people have more than 100 years of experience, collectively. So
Not each one of us. Not each one of us.
So please feel free to ask as many questions as you want to. Let's make it an interactive session, and let it not be one-sided. Whether you want to go towards becoming a GC or not, and what qualities you possess, let's examine what are the challenges available or in front of us today. You have pressure from investors. You have corporate governance. You have risk mapping to do. In addition to, you have compliances and contracts and litigation to look after. So how do you at the end of the day evaluate the risks? What is the difference between risk taking and risk avoidance, or risk evasion for that matter? Is it possible for us, or would it be possible for us to strike a balance between all 3? I don't know. I think everyone else can opine on that, but it's a debatable topic. But let's start with Anne. What do you think it kind of takes to become a GC? And you spent a lot of years, right? And
a lot of years.
A lot of and
A lot of
and
years.
we all would like to hear from everyone as to what aspirations did you carry? What did you want to do at the end of the day? Did you spend sleepless nights in addressing issues? Leave it to you.
Well, we all have sleepless nights, but I don't have that many of them, usually because you either get really prepared or you have a great team, and there's just so much you can't control. But I guess I don't know how you best prepare for these roles. My career has been really complicated and had a lot of great opportunities in it. I've done government, spent 3 years as a lawyer for the Navy, private practice, 2 different stints, once as an associate and once as a partner. I've been spun off 3 times. I've been acquired twice. I've moved around a lot. I've lived in, 8 states. I've got 7 bars, 3 bar exams. I think if I could sum it up, though, I'd say, you want to change before you have to. And so I was in an industry that had about 15 years that was really dynamic. There were a lot of spin-offs, a lot of sales, a lot of transitions, and you've got to be able to change with those things. Some people, I've talked to plenty of general counsels who've stayed in the same company their whole career, and they managed to get the experience they wanted and move around and succeed. That wasn't the playbook I had. I think there are as many different ways to get here as there are people in the room with all the different capabilities. Some people wouldn't move because of family situations. I think you need to make your career decisions in the context of your personal values first and foremost. I did raise kids and kept my marriage intact through all those years. Was very lucky, but it's not for everybody. Just like, moving around with the military isn't for everybody either. But I do think most companies today do want you to show the willingness to move. If you're lucky enough to be in a company that has a major concentration in the same region you're located in, move around amongst divisions, move around amongst functions. But I think, when I was first in this career field, the idea was you stay in the same company and hope you would get promoted up the pyramid if you just could outlast everybody. I don't think that's the paradigm for anybody anymore.
Yeah. So for me, mine was not as complicated. I started at a law firm in New York I only lasted about 1.5 years, 2 years, didn't love it. went in-house, was a finance lawyer, worked for IBM, moved to Cat Financial in Nashville. It's a whole nother world coming from New York. And then had an opportunity to go overseas for a 3-year assignment that lasted for about 14 years. So that was something I hadn't really planned on or even really wanted, but my wife did. And so we did it, and then I moved over to Dell while I was in Europe, and then ran the European team, the Asian team for a couple of years, and then came back here and took the GC job about it'll almost be 5 years ago. I think for me, what was important in getting the job, preparing for the job, and actually doing a decent job in it was having a goal pretty early on. I mean, it wasn't by accident. I knew that I wanted to lead a broader team and be a general counsel. And so having that goal helped direct me to probably the second reason, which was really working on the things that I wasn't that great at to do the job. I'm not the perfect article that you see in front of you today. I wasn't always that. But no, I know, shocking. But there are a lot of skills that are required in this role that I was not particularly good at, whether it's speaking in front of a group extemporaneously or delivering a direct and sometimes not that positive message, or just having a bit more presence. So there are a lot of things that having a goal and being pretty honest with myself about what I was pretty good at and what I wasn't was really important. And then having people who supported me and believed in me was also really important. And I had a few of those throughout my career and got pretty fortunate with that. So to me, those are probably the most important things, and some luck and opportunity and taking risk. Like I said, going overseas, I think, gave me the opportunity to get this job, and wasn't really planned. And certainly once you make a decision, the implications of that are unknown. And so, you try to leave as many, at least for me, I try to leave as many options open as possible each time I had to make a career decision.
So you know what, sorry for the interjection,
No.
I apologize for this, but before we move on to Trish, what Indra Nui said yesterday, you have to be at the right place at the right time. Second is that you got to be ready to face all kind of challenges. For example, Rich mentioned that he had to travel overseas, and mentioned that there could be a family issue. There could be multiple issues, and there could be multiple impediments that could come your way. But your ability to kind of overcome those impediments is the most important thing that you should have in your mind, and ready to face all kinds of challenges, not from a family perspective or from a personal perspective, but even from a professional perspective. If you are ready to do a thing which is much more challenging than a normal thing, probably you would be better recognized. And that's what came out yesterday in our conversation. Trish, I move on to you.
Sure. I echo everything that Rich and Ann have said in terms of what it takes. And the risk-taking piece, I think, resonates particularly for me. I can't say I wanted to, I wanted to be a general counsel, and I knew I wanted to be a general counsel. I knew I wanted to be in a position to have an impact. And I kind of didn't care what you called me. I cared a little bit of what you paid me, but I honestly didn't feel like I want to be general counsel. I did feel I had more to contribute. I wanted, the fun part of work for me was feeling like I made a difference, and I've grown to appreciate the role of the general counsel, the myriad ways in which you can make a difference. So I really appreciate actually the role as well as the impact position I'm in. So I think that was a guide for me. I think the biggest risk I took, I certainly took risks not knowing I was taking risks, actually. I mean, I sort of jumped ship from a law firm, went in-house, and probably didn't make that decision with a lot of consideration. It turned out great, but there were moments when it didn't feel like it was going to turn out well. I jumped from MassMutual to Cigna after 10 years at MassMutual, and I would say that if, sitting where I was at MassMutual, I was in a pretty good spot from a, hey, maybe I will be the successor general counsel, to a position where those assurances were, it was less clear that that would happen for me. But I made that leap, in part because I thought, actually, I'm really putting all my eggs in this one basket here if I stay at Mass Mutual. If I go here, I broaden out and I give myself more opportunity. I absolutely think that was essential for me in terms of making the next step to general counsel. So I think, just highlight those particular.
So just one thing, Trish, and this is for you as well, Richard. The fact is that if you want to become a GC, let's say for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, does it have to be a cocktail of both law firm and company experience, or only one of them would work?
I personally think that when you go in-house, it helps to go in-house at as high up the food chain as you can. And that generally means being in a law firm for some period of time.
Right.
So working your way up from being a first year, first of all, most places don't hire right out of law school in-house. But I think going in at a reasonably senior level, and then there's also, you could be too seasoned and stay too long at a law firm, but I think being seasoned by a law firm for all sorts of good technical reasons is a good thing. And then I think it probably positions you better in terms of getting in-house. But I don't know if you have a different view.
Your views?
Yeah, I'm probably the odd one here. I've lived in the same city for 40 years. I've worked at 3 places, 2 law firms and 1 company. So I was remarkably lucky in a way of being able to stay in DC throughout my career. And sometimes that's, it's a risk not to do things as much as it is to do things. And so I kind of understood that. So it was 20 years private practice, and then jumped over to Marriott. I agree with what you say. I think jumping when I did was very useful because I ended up in a fairly mid-level senior position, which was really helpful, I think, in retrospect. I did, at the time, GC wasn't even on my radar screen. I just wanted to do something different than what I was doing in private practice. And Marriott seemed like a great place to go. I think from there on, what I've seen is how you succeed in a company depends on a lot of luck, a lot on the culture of the company, and whether there's a fit. I think there's a huge part of that, and I did not see that when I moved into into Marriott. Had a great reputation, but I did not realize, I should say, how important that is to have a cultural fit in terms of values, expectations, work ethic, and how you relate to the people in a company. Because I think that has a great deal of influence as to whether you're going to succeed or not, and how far you can go. And assuming you have the ambition to always step ahead, and I'm sure everybody in this room does. You really have to understand that, and it's. I think like you, when you said you didn't quite know what you're getting into. I didn't know what I was getting into either, and that was just fortuitous. I got into a company that I liked a lot. I ended up liking the industry a ton, and it was a company that also has grown enormously in the last 20 years, and so that helped. It helped in terms of the breadth of work that you get to do. It's not the same stuff. It kept expanding. And there was always more to do, and so in many ways I was so fortunate to land in a company that is growing. And I would say, if you're looking at companies, make sure it's growing.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to riff a little bit on your point, because I think that's really essential fit. One of the key elements to getting to a position like this is, and I think a couple have mentioned, the ability to influence and the ability to inspire your teams, right? You want to do great things, you want to have an impact. You can't do that if you're not able to influence people who either don't understand the legal framework you're coming from because they're not lawyers, or they don't understand the risk profile you're describing because they've not experienced those risks. And so if you can't influence, you can't lead. And if you can't influence, it's because you're not in the right cultural fit. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you particularly, although it could be. But 9 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, it's that you're not a good fit for the organization. And so I think that's really, really important to understand as you're particularly mid-career and you aspire to a leadership role. You don't know if you're going to get the opportunity or not. I think it's important, in addition to looking at whether it's growing, is to be pretty self-analytical and say, am I really going to be able to be effective here? Am I going to be able to impact people, change minds, and have an influential role? And if you don't, then that's the time I think you look for a place where you might be a better fit. And again, don't take it as there's anything wrong with you, although it does help you to maybe learn, to your point about maybe there's some things I have to do better to be effective. There is that piece of it, but there's fit.
Yeah.
And fit's always important.
And part of the fit, I think, is being able to be yourself at the
You
company.
have to be authentic.
Exactly, because it's hard to lead and inspire people.
You
unless
wanted to ask a
you're-
question?
Yeah, and thank you so much for all of your time. It's very interesting. A few questions for all of you, but I started thinking about them when Anne started speaking, and I know that Rich also mentioned this, and it's a 3-part question. Sorry, guys.
Okay.
As a good lawyer, here I go.
Oh boy, okay.
Get out of 10.
So I think it's fascinating that both of you took different risks in different companies and traveled to different states and or countries. And I wanted to ask, do you think, is it imperative to raise your hand within the company, even if you're not being asked, and say, I'm willing to do this, and or reaching out externally, and how you do that? And second, did you take non-legal roles in those changes within the company? They said maybe, great, thanks so much for raising your hand, but there's only these roles, and what your thoughts are about that. And then in terms of growth and improvement and the weaknesses that one may have within themselves, do you think it's more thinking about them and being proactive, and maybe it's leadership and practicing those skills with how you speak to your direct reports, for instance, or additional classes, whether they're classes you may need, those kinds of things.
Yeah, so I didn't take.
That's a lot of questions.
Yeah, a lot of questions. I'll answer because I didn't write
That's
the
the whole
notes.
panel.
You
That's
did,
the
I
whole
know.
topic.
Yeah, I did not take roles outside of legal, but I did try to stretch myself and put my hand up for the most difficult problems I could take. We had the CEO of Pepsi last night who talked about the fact that people don't really remember or recognize people who are doing the easy jobs or even the day-to-day jobs. To me, it was always, how do I differentiate myself? So we have a whole bunch of smart people here. They'll be, for leadership positions, I think everyone, and I ask myself, why me? Why me and not anybody else? And there needs to be an answer. And one of those answers is somebody who takes the tough jobs and succeeds, or at least tries. So to me, that was really important. And then in terms of development, I think the best way, it's incumbent on each one of us. It's great if we all have great managers who care about us, and I know that at least my managers have always done that, but they're busy. They have other priorities. So ultimately, while it's great to have mentors and great to have people who support you, it's down to you and being really honest with yourself about what you're not that great at. And you don't even need to get verbal feedback. You can tell how you're doing. Are you getting, if you're not getting promoted, who is and why? If you're not getting assignments, then that's feedback. So there's plenty of feedback that you can just observe, and being really open to that and honest, and then identifying what skills you need in a role and really working on them for me.
I think you absolutely have to raise your hand. I think if you don't, I don't think you have a shot at a more position. I recall the first time I was conscious of doing it, I think I sort of instinctively did it, but I had come up as sort of a litigator, and then when I started working for the government, I learned government contracts. And my first in-house job, I'm a government contracts lawyer. I do commercial work, but I'm not a corporate lawyer. I'd mostly been in the divisions, and they needed somebody to lead a spinoff, which was really early days. There weren't a lot of spinoffs out there. So first of all, I had to go figure out what's the definition of a spinoff, right? And then they said, all right, we want you to put together the due diligence plan. What's due diligence? You know, and I go to my little, you know, we had LexisNexis in the early days, and I went on, looked up all the definitions of due diligence. I mean, you're talking about starting from zero. But the point is, you raise your hand and you say you'll do it, and then you do it really well. And you do it by asking people who know. When you're in-house, you get your outside counsel to teach you and take you to school. You build a team of people that trust you and that you trust, and you get it done. So raising your hand, I think, is essential. I did take a couple of non-legal roles. For me, it was very important in my development. I stepped out and actually ran an operation and then a division, which was, it actually was the way I learned to understand the business financials and what it literally, how hard it is to get revenue and how hard it is to not leak revenue once you get it. You know, that's called profit. You know, how do you get there? So it helped me to understand what, you know, my in-house people were needing. And the second one was a compliance role. If you're here, you've got some sort of a compliance role. It was another hand raising. I was working for a company that got a deferred prosecution agreement. And then there were two other ancillary regulatory agency agreements with it. And we had outside monitors, and somebody had to be the chief ethics and compliance officer to work with them and report to the board every 2 months on this progress. But it was a global effort. You had to literally create and install a compliance program on a global basis, you know, commercial and government. I was on the road almost 80% of the time. And I would not have had that experience had I not raised my hand. I never had the chance to work overseas, but how else do you fill your global bucket if that's something that, you know, you want to have in your suite? So, I don't know, I'll defer to the other.
I think I'd like to add one thing, you know, what Ann said, is that, you know, I think from our perspective, collaboration is very important. You know, even if you're working along with HR for that matter. That's very important because they kind of come up to you, they look up to you for, you know, when they kind of frame a policy. From a legal perspective, they would like you to check if the policy is correct. Second, dealing with finance, for example. I can talk about from an India law perspective because I'm an India lawyer, and for example, there was a bankruptcy code which came into being, or valuation guidelines which have come into being recently. Both finance and the legal are effectively collaborating with each other to make a white paper, and from a risk perspective, you know, make sure that all the risks are covered. And that is what I said initially, that is, how do you assess the risk? It's avoidance, or, you know, how do you take, whether you want to go ahead and take those risks. Second is that you also become a profit center, you're not a cost center. For example, there's a dispute which, wherein you had to pay approximately $1 million. You end up, giving them much less than that. So to that extent, you have saved that money for your company. So you could possibly assess those kind of situations. So it's collaboration, teamwork, cost saving. So you ultimately become a profit center and not a cost center. And maybe you can fight for better bonuses.
Yeah. I'd be careful about going to a non-legal route because it might derail you a little bit too. And it
is hard to get back in. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be hard, and I think in the meantime, you know, everybody else is running, you know, towards the same thing. I think what's more important is just being really good at non-legal stuff. And there are a couple areas where that's a natural, that you have to be in a company that law firms, you know, you don't. You just get to be a lawyer. You know, I found the two that had the greatest potential were finance and communications. Is one thing is, you're all good writers. I think we all came out of law school, hopefully, with one really good skill set, and that's being able to write. And that really helped me work with communications and, you know, be very collaborative, have a great time. But, you know, when a crisis hit and we wanted, you know, and you see the first statement and, you know, you want to vomit because it's just so, not only is it wrong, but it isn't even written well. and you know, you get a chance to, okay, let's fix this up and work with it. So I really enjoyed that part, communications, PR side of it. And finance, you know, the better you can mix your understanding of how your business makes that profit and how your contracts and how you deal with people enhances that, the more important you're going to be in-house.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You just writing a good contract, that'll get you a salary, but it's not going to get you a promotion.
Right. Trish, this one question, like lot of us are, chief ethics and compliance officers of various entities. What is your view, or what do you feel as to how important you are or you would be versus the other candidates?
You mean as a chief compliance officer?
Yes,
in-
vis-a-vis a GC. So you would like to be a GC alone, or would you be open to addressing compliance and ethics related issues? And what do you think could be the synergies, or a different candidate in isolation would be sufficient?
Well, in every organization that I've been part of, the general counsel has oversight over the compliance function. So that's a model that I'm accustomed to. I think it works quite well when compliance and legal are under the same roof and under a common leadership and closely aligned day to day. I think the compliance, when I went to Cigna as the head business lawyer for all their U.S. operations. I then took on the role of global chief compliance officer in addition to that legal role, and then we all realized that was probably not a doable combination, and so I then took on the global compliance role exclusively. I really grew to appreciate how much having that role can really teach you about the business. You have to understand the plumbing in a way that I think is incredibly useful as a lawyer and as a person advising business people. It gives you a fluency, I think, that can be very helpful. And so I really appreciated the background, the opportunity to really be part of compliance. I think Anne and Ed's watch out around how long you stay doing that, and if you try to get back to the legal function from a chief compliance officer or from a compliance function, I think in some institutions that can be hard to do. So, and probably, frankly, would have been hard for me to do had I stayed at Cigna. My guess is if I'd kept doing that, I would have been pegged that way. When I went to Voya and the CEO was interviewing me, he was sort of much more interested in my Mass Mutual experience, because it's similar businesses, but appreciated that I'd had a global role and that I had a big team and all that sort of stuff. So it just worked out to be a nice combination for me. But I absolutely think compliance can be a very useful experience for a general counsel to have.
Yeah,
But huge amount of experience, primarily if you're especially if you're a listed company, a huge amount of compliance is from SEC's perspective. So if you're a private limited company, it's still better. But if you're a listed company, then the compliances are huge. I'm sure about that.
I think some of the skill sets that you need in a general counsel role, you really get in spades as a compliance person. Making tough decisions where the answer is not crystal clear. There's a lot of ambiguity. Working very closely with senior executives and influencing where you think a decision should go without necessarily dictating it. So I think there's a lot of great experiences you get that are really relevant.
And I think you get board exposure more quickly in that context. You may not want it, but
Yeah.
Well, what about ethics? What about ethics?
there's a question.
That's a good question
Sure.
to follow up on that.
Sure.
How directly involved were the boards of your companies in your appointments? It might be different from, it might feel different being hired in versus being promoted up, for example, but could you comment on that?
Well, my board was Michael Dell because it was private, so it was that was it. So it wasn't for me to.
My board, not too much.
Mine not at all.
Interesting.
And they were interested in bringing someone in. They were part of that decision-making process. It was transition, at least in 2 situations, but not in terms of the who. How about you?
Yeah, so I had a little bit of exposure to the Mass Mutual process of how they thought through a general counsel appointment, and there the CEO, I think, wanted the discretion to hire his general counsel, but was very sensitive to this person needs to get the sign off. You know, he needed to have buy-in from the board. At Voya, I think it was the CEO's discretion entirely, and I think that board simply feels at that executive appointment level, if he wants their input, he'll ask for it, and that's the way they approach it. And I think it's a function of boards and CEOs and their relationships, just how much they want to.
But I would suggest it's pretty rare for the board to be involved in hiring the GC unless you're in either a massive compliance failure or where there's something that the GC brings to the table that's essential to the board on a day-to-day basis. I just haven't heard much about boards being that involved. I think if you're internal and you go through succession planning processes,
Yeah.
maybe they know more about you, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's still going to be the CEO's decision, and he's going to want to make it knowing that it's something that'll work with his board or her board.
Just wanted to add, Rindy Ditmars, who's our General Counsel Americas of JL, and Mark, who's our Global General Counsel and handles huge amount of functions. I mean, what do you think from your perspective was the involvement of board in hiring of a particular GC? For example, when I was hired, it was under your instruction. Jane Niven, who was then the Regional General Counsel, and then the CEO, Anuj Puri, took my interview on board. So what are your views on that?
I think for the regional GC, none falls. So I'm the GC for the Americas.
Yeah.
I don't know for global market, the board gets involved at all on the global GC.
I mean, I had some board members interview me, and I was coming from outside. And again, I do think it's a function of the culture of the board. I honestly think it's weird that a board wouldn't want more involvement, especially these days. And I get that, probably, our roles aren't necessarily as important as I or we think they ought to be. But I also think this idea, and we've heard it a little bit, this idea the boards have of sort of nose in and fingers out. I think they do too much fingers out, personally, and I think they pay the price. Because a lot of the times when things go horribly wrong in companies or other institutions, the Penn State, Michigan State, these other awful things that have happened, and the board members are like, I had no idea. And to me, it's like, because you didn't do your job. I mean, you should have more of a view into what's going on and not just listen to the CEO. And I think if you let the CEO just hire these roles, they're going to hire people they like and they can get along with who aren't necessarily the stone in their shoe that they ought to be. So personally, I'm just saying this is my sort of bugaboo about boards in general. They ought to be more involved than they are, I think. And when they aren't, it's health care. And we see that all the time, and it's always ludicrous to see them say, I had no idea. And you do, and it's, I think, because they're not doing their job. So to me, part and parcel of that is, who have you got running these functions? And don't just assume it's sort of all good if you're not, getting your number.
Thank you.
I have
Yes.
a different question, because you've all mentioned it in different ways, but to be a general counsel, there's a leadership component, there's a business understanding component, and it's not just come from outside counsel. I'm sure you've all on your team brought people from outside. They sit down, they do their job, and they're really, really good lawyers, and then they're frustrated at 5 years of, why am I not advancing? Why am I, and you're like, you don't understand the financials, you're not getting to know the business. So my question for you is, what do you do to, you've identified maybe some potential successors for your role. What do you do to try to get them out of there? If you just come in and sit down and do a really good job as a lawyer, that's not going to be enough.
Well, you had the conversation with them, first of all. And, I came in, it's interesting because I came into this particular role for the sole reason that there wasn't anybody that the CEO or the board thought was ready for that. And yet there were 3 people in-house who thought they were. And nobody was able to have the conversation with them. So I had it with them. I said, okay, you didn't get it. I got it. I'm a stranger. You're invested in the company. You've been here a long time. You've done a great job. We've got a phenomenally talented team. Do you want to go get any operational experience? Oh, no, I'm not leaving New York. Okay. I'm a securities lawyer. What am I going to go do in an operation? Okay. I respect that. That's fine. Have you ever worked in any other part of the company? Oh, no. No, but I'm so good at what I do, and I make submissions that go to the board all the time. Yeah, you do. But how much perspective do you have on how this company is actually run? How we make money, how we make products, how we inspire employees and do the whole... And nobody had the conversation to explain that framework with them in a way that wasn't an indictment. That's okay. You're successful. You make a lot of money. You're respected. You add value. You don't have to be the general counsel, but you ought to have enough self-awareness to know why. Now, that doesn't mean you'd get it, but it does mean that if your company values different things in that top slot, you ought to be self-aware enough to know that you've got to either do those things or get some facsimile of them, whether it's working on projects where you know you'll learn something you didn't know before, or whether it's doing extensive travel to learn other places, or taking on a particular project you really don't know how to do and then traveling from your home base. I don't know if that's your experience, but that's been mine.
I did a lot of traveling, but I think a lot of it is one of the best examples I can give is you bring the lawyers to committee meetings with you, all right? And you know, you might be the voting member on this committee or that committee, but there's somebody else who's done all the work. And you bring them to the meeting and you encourage them to participate, because I think lawyers generally tend to be shy about that and want to just sort of sit there and let the paper do the talking, but that's not how it works. And I think, you know, for people to get to the position, they got to have a reputation in the company. You know, you got to, people have to think about you in a certain way. And the most effective way, at least at you know, my company, was what you said in a meeting. You know, was it smart? Was it dumb? Were you willing to talk? And I find a lot of lawyers just aren't willing to talk, and it's shocking to me. I'm talking too much right now, but that's, at least in Marriott, I think that was the most effective way to bring lawyers out and to raise their image and get lawyers promoted.
Right. But tell us, and this is for the benefit of everyone in the audience, the fact that we spoke about partnerships with the finance department, with the HR, with business. And what would be your advice? And this is for all of you, or you can address it as well. Is what would be your advice to the budding GCs as to kind of how to foster better relationships, or how to become a well-respected business partner?
Yeah, but I think it's absolutely essential. It's not in a company, it's not a law firm. So you're running a business and you have to be partners with your entire client base. I think building relationships is one of the most critical aspects of progressing and being collaborative and credible with your clients. We used to focus a lot on legal issues as an end in and of itself, but our clients just, can we do it, yes or no? And they presume that we do our jobs and have done all the research and are giving them an answer, but it also presumes that we really understand the business goals and the risk tolerance of the company. I think the only way you do that is interacting and really developing deep relationships, so that when you do give advice, you've established a reputation and a credibility that allows you to be successful.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned early on in-house, and that I've carried throughout my career, is to build all legal objectives, even the risk-related ones and the ones that are unique to being a lawyer in-house. You play a special role, there's no doubt, but fundamentally the objectives are built off of the business objectives. So that's the starting point. And so I think in that, if you do that consistently, then everyone on the team should understand how it is that they're contributing to those goals. And it really forces people, I think, to recognize, okay, we're in a business here, and I'm contributing to that end and to that endpoint. It may be by raising a flag or, or rerouting something. But I think if you have to be able to speak in those terms. I completely echo what Rich said. And frankly, this is a service profession. And so I have, and I don't see this at all at Voya, but I kind of wince when I'm in a room with a lawyer or outside counsel or somebody who's considers themselves the smartest person in the room and considers themselves impressive in terms of how they're going to explain the law to the business person who does not care about that. I mean, it's like and so I think really important to understand, to be a really good listener, to be as without agenda as possible for your colleagues, and with your CEO, and I think those are critical skill sets.
Ed?
Nothing more to add. That's those are great skill sets. And actually, getting back, it's one of the reasons why this issue of how much is the board involved in the selection of a GC. I understand what you're saying, but I think at the end of the day, it's a CEO decision, and the CEO's got to really if you don't have that connection, it's not gonna. The chances of it being a successful relationship are not so good. If I were CEO and I had the board, play a big role in the GC, I'd say something's wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think there's no doubt that an active and well-functioning board ought to have an opinion about the general counsel, ought to know whether, and I certainly feel that from our audit committee chair, appropriately so, that he is kicking the tires sufficiently to feel comfortable that how we do our legal work and how we do our compliance work is something they can rely on. That is an important, that's an important function of the audit committee, is to have enough basis to believe that these control functions work. And you have to give them enough information to evaluate that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's, as Ann said, I think it depends where the company is. And if it's had experience of compliance issues, if you're the audit chair, you probably do want to see who that person's going to be.
Sure. You had a question?
I have a question for you, Ed. Since your role has changed from being the general counsel to being the senior advisor to the CEO, how have your conversations changed? You can't take off all those 21 years of Marriott history, but
Have
I'm
they
just curious.
changed?
Yeah.
They're not as frequent.
That's right.
It's not that demanding a role. And the conversations, the advice is still there. It's just I'm not running a department anymore, and so I'm not, which generally, that was 80-90% of my job, was running a department and making sure careers worked and people advanced and we got the work done and we're on the right track. Take all that off the table. And now it's just, okay, what fresh thoughts do I have that are useful? And so it's a great job. I have it for a year.
So let me ask you, again, what keeps you awake at night, whether it is developing a good risk mitigation program, developing a good team, handling investor pressures? What keeps you awake? What do you think in your mind, or it's an encapsulation of everything? What keeps you awake at night? What do you think are the most stressful factors while you deal with multiple issues you come across?
I used to be able to say nothing keeps me up at night, because you have to be a balanced human being in these jobs. If you think it's all about you and you can't sleep, then you're either in the wrong job or you got the wrong team. I will say that there are moments in our jobs where you wake up at 3:30 in the morning and go, oh my gosh, and I've got to think long and hard about how I address this particular problem, and I better, get in at 6:30 and get it started, because I probably should have started it 2 days ago, but I didn't think about it because and you go through this whole litany of things and you rush into work and you get it done. But, had that question asked a lot. I've asked it a lot. I've talked to a lot of CEOs about it. And there are people who literally keep notepads by their bedside table because they can't sleep, and so they write down everything. That's just not the way, I work, and it's not the way the teams that I work with work. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I've been in a couple of bet the company situations where you do a couple of all-nighters, but you never really planned to go to sleep anyway, so it didn't really keep you up. You just never, gave yourself the option to sleep. So not if you you can come into a company in a moment of crisis, and it's really hard to get the ship stabilized. And I think some of us have had that experience, and it's exhausting, but it's not something that you should lose sleep over, other than the fact that you can't work for 24 hours. Because you've got to rely on your talent, you've got to rely on your team, and you've got to rely on your CEO and your board and your business team. And if you can't, then don't take on the challenge, I guess is how I'd answer that. But
How would you kind of perceive, because today the social media is very aggressive. If you're sitting, you brought the company to a particular level, and social media, the perception, the reputation, one wrong act can bring the reputation from here to here. So what do you what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I mean, first of all, I'm tired, so I sleep quite well.
Yeah,
so that sounds, yeah. But one of the great learnings of this job is that stuff happens, and it's not always good, and you just have to play through it, sort of whatever it is. And this administration creates a lot of issues that really we didn't have to deal with in the past. Whether it's immigration or tax or trade.
We almost made it.
We did. Almost. I won't go on now. But it does create challenges about reputation and as a company, what's your public position? Or do you take a public position? And if you do, how do you thread the needle, and how do you influence policy but still keep employees on board and stakeholders and customers? So not that I necessarily lost sleep about it, but those were complex issues that are over and above the day job or any other legal issues or compliance or other risk issues. So, but there's not much you can do. Staying up at night doesn't help. Like you said, you have to be pretty balanced. You have to have a great team that you have confidence in, and you deal with it, and that's where the relationships come in. It's not just you. You have your team, and you also have other executives in the company to work with and come up with a conclusion and move forward together. So
it's not for somebody with high anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important to get a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
You can stay to Marriott. Hey, I riffed off
The
another-
great beds, yeah.
So I didn't, but actually, I think part of that is, in the room, you're the one whose hair is not on fire.
Yeah.
And it's really, really important, because if the general counsel's hair on fire, there's...
Assuming you have hair, but...
Yeah, assuming I... thank you.
He's a close second. It's okay.
Exactly. I was talking about me.
He just grows
Thank
it
you, and I
longer.
appreciate that. Thank you.
Hey, just
On my side as well.
Yeah, exactly. He's ahead of the game.
but you are, you want to remember that as a lawyer, and particularly as a GC, you actually are the one who wants to be kind of the person who is objective, who can sit down and is not, emotionally distraught over something, no matter how bad it is out there. Because sometimes that you might be the only person in the room who is like that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But tomorrow, let's see, the general counsels were to step down, for example, all of you were to step down, hypothetically speaking, what kind of successor would you want for your company?
Exactly like us.
Yes. Why mess with perfection?
Yeah.
Listen, I go back to what we were talking about with the CEO. The CEO relationship is incredibly important. How those dynamics play out are really important, assuming the skills are there. I had a direct report of mine ask me a question about sort of his readiness for success. And, he's ready now. He's ready now, and he will do the job when he gets that job at my company or somewhere else. he will do it very differently than I do it. And that's okay. He is
That's
a
okay.
different person with a different skill set, and he'll just figure out how to balance out those gaps, as you talked about, Rich, in a different way than I did.
You have a question?
So when you guys were thinking, hello again, and you all mentioned different types of skill sets and that general counsels need, and they'll do the job differently, and I think that's right. And you've all mentioned the role of the CEO. In your experience, is it more likely that you will be hired by the CEO and it's somebody that you have met, worked with in the past, or it's, you've never seen the person before and just when you're interviewing with that person, they feel that you're the right fit?
Yeah, I think the answer to all that is yes. I mean, I think there's an infinite number of paths to that. I mean, probably more than most. I've worked for quite a few companies, just because of spinoffs, not because I couldn't keep a job. In some cases, it was, you have a certain reputation in your own industry and in your own field, and when that new CEO and or board, candidly, it was a board member that had heard about, what I'd done before and brought me to the attention of the CEO. I didn't know the board member. He knew a board member who'd been on my other board, and that came through. Headhunters, they will sometimes find you, and I've gone that route. I've gone the route of, a good friend of mine who was the GC and was retiring and called me up and said, I'm going to leave. Do you want the job? So I think the important thing is you have a good network. You make sure your reputation extends outside of your own company. You work within your company if that's where you want to progress. But again, it's your reputation and it's your networking, because, nobody's going to hear you if you're just working in your office doing great work and you're not, getting out. Ed, you were up in pretty much the same company. How would you answer that?
I think the one I would really highlight is reputation in the industry. That's so valuable, and so getting out of the building, and meeting people at other companies. Your lawyer colleagues, business colleagues at other companies, people across the table who you run across. They all have an influence in this, and I think I would put that at the very top, because I agree. I think people hear about it and they hear, so and so is good to work with. And
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we have to come to an end to this session. But just to summarize, I think it has been a very interesting session. Information has kind of come out from everyone, and especially for the budding GCs. But let me tell you, it's the first and topmost thing in your mind should be ethics and values, ability to work hard, face challenges, and do everything what is right, or use your best endeavors to do virtually every possible thing in this world. And I just kind of, I was reading President Obama's, when he lost one of the states, he lost the Democratic nomination elections. He says, yes, we can. As a lawyer, as an individual, I have a still different perception. Replace the word with, where yes, we will, and remove the word can. You'll see there's a lot of difference. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time and patience. It was great having you.